Sir, there's a young woman. She says it's vital. She's waiting at the entrance. These words broke Julian Vance's calm, a ripple in his perfectly ordered world. Julian Vance was a man who commanded more than just attention. He commanded silence. His presence filled the private dining area of the restaurant. Even as he sat alone at a corner table, his gaze fixed on a complex financial report. 50 years old, with silver threads tracing through his impeccably styled dark hair, Julian was the architect of an empire. His companies shaped cities, influenced markets, and employed thousands. Yet, for all his power, his evenings often ended like this: solitude, surrounded by the quiet hum of wealth and the deference of staff. He preferred it this way. Predictability was his most valued asset, his shield against the chaos of the world. He disliked surprises, especially unexpected visitors. His assistant, Robert, knew this. For Robert to interrupt him during dinner, at his sanctuary, meant something truly out of the ordinary had occurred. Julian slowly lowered the tablet, his brow furrowing slightly, a subtle signal of his displeasure. He did not speak, but his look was enough. Robert understood. Robert, a man whose career depended on anticipating Julian's every mood, visibly swallowed. Robert said, "She doesn't have an appointment, sir." She gave the name Amelia Hayes. "She seems insistent." Amelia Hayes. The name meant nothing to Julian. Another hopeful entrepreneur, perhaps, or a charity worker bypassing protocol. He dealt with such people daily, usually through a carefully managed filtration system of secretaries and PR teams. He had no time for unscheduled intrusions. Julian Vance said, "Tell her I'm busy, and that I don't receive unannounced guests." His voice was low, even, a quiet command that rarely needed repeating. Robert nodded, already turning to leave, relief evident in his posture. He had done his duty. But just as Robert reached the doorway, a young woman stepped past him, her eyes locking onto Julian Vance across the room. She was petite, slender, dressed in the crisp black and white uniform of a waitress, her apron neatly tied. Her hair, a warm chestnut brown, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked out of place in the opulent setting, a wildflower amidst exotic orchids. Yet, there was a fierce resolve in her posture, a determined set to her jaw that stopped Julian Vance cold. He had seen that look before, in boardrooms, in tough negotiations, but never from a woman so young, and certainly never from someone serving him coffee. Amelia Hayes walked directly towards his table. Each step was deliberate, a silent drumbeat against the thick Persian carpet. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, a nervous habit, but her eyes never wavered from Julian's. He watched her approach, a flicker of irritation turning into a spark of something he couldn't quite name. Curiosity? Annoyance? Intrigue? He felt the weight of every other diner's discreet glances, the hushed whispers that would inevitably follow this unusual scene. He despised being the center of unwanted attention. Amelia stopped a respectful distance from his table, close enough for him to see the slight tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Julian Vance stared at her, waiting. He expected a plea, a sales pitch, a request for a job. He was prepared to dismiss it all with a single, firm word. Amelia said, "Mr. Vance, my name is Amelia Hayes." Her voice was soft, but clear, carrying a surprising strength. "I apologize for interrupting your dinner," Julian Vance said. "You've made your apology. Now, what is so urgent that it couldn't wait for a proper appointment?" His tone was clipped, designed to cut to the chase, to regain control. He gestured vaguely to the empty seat opposite him. "Make it quick." He did not invite her to sit, merely implied he would grant her a few moments of his valuable time. Amelia didn't sit. She remained standing, her gaze still unwavering. She said, "It concerns something deeply personal, Mr. Vance. Something I've carried for a very long time." Julian Vance sighed, a slow, deliberate exhalation. Personal matters were even worse than business solicitations. They often involved messy emotions, history he preferred to keep buried. He said, "I assure you, Miss Hayes, I have no personal matters outstanding with anyone I don't already know. And I certainly don't know you." A faint, Almost imperceptible smile touched Amelia's lips, a mix of sadness and knowing. She said, "Perhaps not directly, but you knew my mother. Her name was Evelyn Hayes." The name hit Julian Vance like a physical blow. Evelyn? It was a name he hadn't spoken, hadn't even consciously thought of, in decades. A ghost from a life he had painstakingly dismantled, brick by brick, to build the empire that now surrounded him. The financial report, on his tablet, the expensive cutlery, the hushed reverence of the restaurant, all of it suddenly seemed flimsy, unreal. His perfectly ordered world wobbled on its axis. He felt a cold dread seep into his veins, a fear he hadn't experienced since his youth. Julian Vance said, "Evelyn? That's impossible. She died many years ago." His voice was rougher than he intended, a slight tremor betraying his shock. He tried to compose himself, to dismiss the information, but the sheer unexpectedness of it had caught him off guard. He remembered Evelyn, a vibrant, artistic woman from his early, more rebellious days. A time before his ambition consumed him, before his father's relentless pressure had reshaped him into the man he was now. He remembered the pain, the guilt, the desperate need to move on. Amelia nodded slowly. She said, "She did, Mr. Vance. 22 years ago. To be exact. She died giving birth to me." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Julian Vance felt the blood drain from his face. His sophisticated composure shattered. He stared at Amelia, really looked at her for the first time. Her chestnut hair, the same shade as Evelyn's. The strong line of her jaw, familiar somehow. And her eyes, those clear, direct eyes that held a depth of sadness and resolve. They were Evelyn's eyes. He saw it now, undeniably. A younger, sharper version, but Evelyn's. Julian Vance said, What are you saying?" He could barely articulate the words. His mind reeled, trying to grasp the implications, to connect the dots of a past he believed was sealed shut. Evelyn had died. Yes. He remembered the phone call, the brief, regretful conversation with her family. They had told him she passed away from complications. They never mentioned a child. Why? Why would they keep such a monumental secret from him? Amelia's eyes remained steady, holding his gaze. She said, "I'm saying, Mr. Vance, that Evelyn Hayes was my mother, and I believe you were my father." The last words were spoken with a quiet intensity that left no room for doubt. It wasn't a question, but a statement of undeniable fact, delivered with the weight of 25 years of untold history. The entire private dining room seemed to shrink around Julian. The clinking silverware, the murmur of distant conversations, all faded into an indistinct drone. Only Amelia's words, and the sudden, deafening beat of his own heart, filled his ears. His world, once so stable, now felt like a house of cards crumbling around him. A daughter? He had no children. That was a choice he had made, a sacrifice for his career. Or so he had convinced himself. He rose slowly from his seat, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. His legs felt suddenly weak. Julian Vance said, This is insane. A trick. Who put you up to this?" He searched her face for any sign of deceit, any glimmer of a mercenary motive, but found only a fusio, raw, vulnerable honesty, and a profound sadness that mirrored his own burgeoning shock. Amelia shook her head, a single tear escaping the corner of her eye, quickly wiped away. She said, "No one put me up to this, Mr. Vance. I've lived with this truth my whole life. My mother kept it secret to protect me, and perhaps to protect you, too." She paused, gathering her thoughts, her voice gaining strength. She never wanted anything from you. She just wanted a life for herself, away from the expectations that came with your family name. Julian Vance paced a step, then another, his mind racing through decades. Evelyn had disappeared from his life suddenly. One day, she was there, a bright, challenging presence. The next she was gone, leaving only a brief, ambiguous note. He had tried to find her, for a short while, but his own family had pressured him intensely to forget her, to focus on his destiny. They had painted her as a flighty, irresponsible artist, a distraction, and he, young and ambitious, had eventually succumbed to their pressure. He had allowed himself to believe she simply moved on, that their intense, brief love affair was just a youthful folly. He had buried the memory, deep and thoroughly. Julian Vance said, "But why now? Why come forward after all this time? If your mother wanted nothing, why are you here?" His voice held a mixture of anger and desperation. The anger was at the unfairness, the disruption. The desperation was for answers, for clarity in this sudden, bewildering upheaval. Amelia finally met his gaze again, her eyes piercing through his hardened exterior. She said, "I'm not here for your money, Mr. Vance. I'm not here to disrupt your life in any way I don't absolutely have to. My mother left me a box, a small, locked wooden box. She told my grandmother, before she died, that I was only to open it when I was ready, when I felt strong enough to understand the truth." She paused, her voice faltering slightly. "I opened it a few months ago. Inside were letters, photographs, and a birth certificate with your name on it." The image of a small, locked wooden box, filled with secrets and a forgotten past, was vivid in Julian's mind. Letters, photographs, a birth certificate, proof. He felt a chilling certainty deep within him. This wasn't a trick. This was real. This woman, standing before him, was not just a waitress, not just an unexpected visitor. She was a link to a past he had systematically erased, a living embodiment of the choices he had made, and the consequences he had unknowingly averted for so long. He remembered Evelyn's artistic nature, her free spirit, her resistance to the rigid structure of his family. He could imagine her keeping such a secret, protecting her child from the pressures of his world. He could also imagine his own family, powerful and influential, quietly ensuring Evelyn and any potential complications simply vanished from his life, perhaps even telling him carefully crafted half-truths. A knot tightened in his stomach. How much of his past had been manipulated without his knowledge? Julian Vance said, "Show me. Show me this proof." His voice was barely a whisper, the once commanding tone replaced by a raw, almost childlike plea. He needed to see it, to touch it, to reconcile the impossible with the suddenly undeniable. Amelia reached into the small, practical bag she carried. Her movements were careful, almost reverent. She pulled out a thick, slightly worn envelope, sealed with an old-fashioned wax stamp. She held it out to him. "It's all here. Her letters, addressed to you, though never sent. And the certificate, the only copy." Julian took the envelope from her. His fingers brushed hers, and he felt a jolt, a strange, undeniable connection. He noticed the warmth of her hand, the faint tremor that still lingered. He looked at the envelope. It felt heavy, not just with paper, but with decades of unspoken words, of a life he never knew existed. He saw the elegant, looping handwriting of Evelyn on the front, his name, his address from 25 years ago. A wave of regret, so profound it was almost physically painful, washed over him. He had been so blind, so caught up in his own ambition, so easily swayed by his family's agenda. He pulled out the contents. First, a photograph. It was old, slightly faded, showing a young Evelyn, radiant and laughing, her arm wrapped around a much younger Julian, his hair darker, his smile unburdened. They were standing by a lake, a memory he had long suppressed. Beside it, another photo, Evelyn holding a newborn baby, her eyes soft with maternal love, tears glistening. The baby, tiny and swaddled, had a shock of dark hair. Amelia. Then, the birth certificate, the official seal, the dates, the names. Evelyn Hayes. Mother. Julian Vance. Father. The hospital name, the doctor's signature. All official, all undeniable. He read the words, his eyes blurring. He read them again, trying to absorb the reality. It wasn't a forgery. It wasn't a desperate gamble. This was solid, concrete proof. Julian Vance said, "My God." The words escaped him, a strangled gasp. He slumped back into his chair, the papers trembling slightly in his hands. This wasn't just a revelation. It was an earthquake beneath the foundations of his entire existence. He had built his life on a narrative of self-made success, of carefully planned choices, of minimal emotional entanglements. And now, this, a daughter, a living, breathing piece of Evelyn, a direct consequence of a past he had convinced himself was dead and buried. He looked at Amelia again. Her face was etched with a complex mix of emotion, relief, fear, hope, and a deep, aching vulnerability. She had taken an enormous risk coming here, confronting him, this powerful, detached man. She wasn't asking for anything, but her presence alone was a demand, a silent plea for acknowledgement, for truth. Amelia said, "I know this is a shock, Mr. Vance. Believe me, living with it hasn't been easy either." Her voice was still gentle, surprisingly compassionate despite the enormity of her revelation. "My grandmother raised me. She always spoke of my mother with such love, but she also carried a great sadness. She told me Evelyn never stopped loving you, even after you left." The word left stung. Julian had seen it as a mutual parting, a drifting apart, influenced by circumstances. Now, he understood the brutal truth. He had abandoned Evelyn, perhaps unwittingly, but effectively. And in doing so, he had abandoned his own child. The weight of that realization was crushing. He looked at the letters again, Evelyn's handwriting. He hadn't dared to open them yet, but he knew what they would contain. A mother's unspoken words to the father of her child. Words of love, perhaps of hurt, but certainly of a life lived without him. He thought of his own lonely existence, the vast emptiness of his grand estate, the quiet dinners. He had convinced himself that solitude was a choice, a mark of strength, but perhaps it was merely the echo of a profound loss, a deliberate rejection of genuine connection. Julian Vance said, "Why did your grandmother keep this from me? All these years?" He looked up, his eyes searching Amelia's face for an answer, for understanding. Amelia said, "She said Evelyn wanted it that way. She feared your family. She knew the kind of pressure they put on you. She wanted me to have a simple life, away from all of that. Away from the headlines, the expectations, the judgment." She paused, her voice growing softer. "She also said, she thought you wouldn't want me. That you had moved on, and a child from a past relationship would only complicate your path to success." That last part struck Julian with a sickening blow of truth. In his youth, he had been ruthless in his ambition, easily swayed by his family's insistence that his future lay solely in business, free from romantic entanglements that could be seen as weaknesses. He remembered arguments, veiled threats about his inheritance if he didn't conform. He had convinced himself that Evelyn was better off without him, that his world was too complicated for her artistic spirit, and as for a child, the possibility had never even been discussed, not in a serious way. He had been so young, so focused, so foolish. Julian Vance closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the enormity of what Amelia had just laid bare. The truth of his past, resurrected in the form of this young woman, was a bitter pill. He had prided himself on his control, his foresight, his ability to manage every aspect of his life. Yet, here was a fundamental, life-altering truth that had completely escaped him for 25 years. A whole quarter century, a lifetime, had unfolded without him knowing his daughter existed. He opened his eyes, his gaze now softer, tinged with a profound sadness as he looked at Amelia. He saw her struggles, her quiet strength, her raw courage. He saw Evelyn in her, a vibrant echo. And he saw himself, a younger, more vulnerable version, before the weight of his empire had hardened him. Julian Vance said, I don't know what to say." His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. He was not the billionaire CEO now. He was simply a man confronted with an undeniable, life-changing truth. This changes everything." He held the birth certificate, the letters, as if they were fragile relics. "All this time, I had no idea. Not a single inkling." Amelia said, "My grandmother told me you were always very kind to my mother, that you truly loved her, in your own way, and that she loved you just as fiercely." A faint smile played on her lips. "She said you once told her you wanted to build an empire for her, so she'd never have to worry about anything again. She always laughed about that, said she preferred painting on canvas to counting money." Julian felt a pang of nostalgia, a bittersweet memory surfacing. He had said that, a young man's earnest, somewhat clumsy declaration of love and ambition. Evelyn had indeed laughed, a bright, melodic sound that had always charmed him. She had been so different from anyone else he knew, so unconcerned with material wealth, so focused on beauty and creation. His family had seen her as a hindrance. He had seen her as freedom. Julian Vance said, "She did. She truly did." He swallowed, his throat tight. The memories flooded back, raw and vivid, piercing through the carefully constructed walls he had erected around his past. He remembered their secret meetings, their shared dreams before his life path diverged so sharply from hers. He remembered the feeling of being utterly alive when he was with Evelyn, a stark contrast to the stifling expectations of his family. He looked around the elegant restaurant, a monument to his success, and then back at Amelia, a testament to his forgotten past. What did success truly mean if it came at such a monumental cost? The cost of a daughter, a family he never knew existed. The cost of a love he had been forced to abandon. The cost of living a life based on a carefully curated narrative, when the true story was far more complex and far more painful. Julian Vance said, "Amelia, I need time to process this." He looked at the papers again, then at her. "This is not something I can simply dismiss. This is monumental." His mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the image of the daughter he had never known with the powerful, unyielding man he had become. The past was not just knocking. It had crashed through his walls, bringing with it a whirlwind of emotion and undeniable truth. He saw the expectation in her eyes, not for money or power, but for recognition, for acceptance, for a father she had only known through stories and faded photographs. The weight of his sudden fatherhood settled upon him, heavy and unexpected. He knew, with chilling certainty, that his life would never be the same again. This confrontation, so sudden and so unexpected, was only the very beginning of a much larger story. He felt an urge to push her away, to retreat into the safety of his insulated world, but her eyes, Evelyn's eyes, held him captive. He couldn't look away, couldn't deny the truth staring back at him. Julian Vance said, "I need to understand everything, Amelia." He motioned for her to sit, finally. "My office. Tomorrow? We need to talk, truly talk, about Evelyn, about your life, about what this all means." Amelia nodded slowly, relief washing over her face. She had taken the first hardest step. The truth was out. Julian Vance said, "My family, they have a lot to answer for." The next morning, the grand foyer of Vance Industries buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. But for Amelia, stepping through its gleaming automatic doors, it was a world away from the bustling diner where she served coffee. The air was thick with the scent of money, ambition, and power. Everything was polished, expensive, and imposing. This was Julian Vance's domain, and for the first time, she felt a tremor of doubt, a whisper of inadequacy. She was just a waitress, after all. What did she truly have in common with this man? Yet, she remembered Evelyn's fierce spirit, her quiet defiance, and Amelia straightened her shoulders. She carried Evelyn's truth, and that was enough. Robert, Julian Vance's long-suffering assistant, met her at the reception desk, his face a mask of polite efficiency. He led her through hushed corridors, past offices filled with busy executives, to a private elevator that ascended silently to the top floor. With each rising floor, the feeling of pressure intensified. Julian Vance's office was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling testament to the empire he controlled. The room was expansive, minimalist, filled with dark wood, chrome, and modern art. Julian stood by the window, his back to her, a solitary figure against the vast cityscape. He turned as she entered, and for the first time, Amelia saw him not as the unapproachable billionaire, but as a man burdened by an invisible weight. He looked tired, his eyes holding a depth of thought she hadn't noticed before. Julian Vance said, "Amelia, thank you for coming." His voice was softer, less authoritative than it had been last night. He gestured to a pair of comfortable leather armchairs facing each other, next to a low, modern coffee table. "Please, sit." Amelia sat, placing her bag on the floor beside her. She felt a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation. Julian took the opposite chair, his posture still rigid, but his gaze was direct, almost searching. He had obviously spent the night thinking. Julian Vance said, "I've been up all night, Amelia," rereading Evelyn's letters, looking at the photographs. It's a lot to take in. He picked up one of Evelyn's unsent letters from the table, his fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. She wrote about so many things. Her dreams, her fears, and her profound love for you. And for me, at least in the beginning, Amelia said. She was an amazing woman. My grandmother always said she was too bright for this world. Julian Vance nodded slowly. He said, she was, full of life. I remember how she could find beauty in anything, even a cracked sidewalk. My family, they didn't understand her. They saw her as a distraction, a threat to my destiny. He paused, a flicker of old resentment in his eyes. My father was a very ambitious man. He believed that to achieve greatness, one had to shed all emotional baggage. Evelyn, to him, was baggage. Amelia said, my grandmother told me your family offered Evelyn money to leave, to disappear. She watched Julian's reaction carefully. Julian Vance flinched, a subtle tightening around his eyes. He said, they did, not directly, but through their lawyers. I was away on a business trip my father arranged. When I returned, Evelyn was gone. They told me she had taken the money and left, that she didn't want to be tied down, that she was flighty. I was young, ambitious, and frankly, naive. I believed them, or I wanted to believe them. It was easier than accepting the truth. He looked at her, his expression raw. The truth being that they systematically pushed her out of my life, paid her off, and created a narrative that suited their agenda. They wanted me to marry someone from a suitable family, someone who would advance the Vance name, not someone who painted landscapes. Amelia felt a surge of sympathy, despite her own pain. Julian had been a pawn, too, in his own way. She said, my grandmother said Evelyn refused the money. She didn't want their dirty money. She just wanted peace and a quiet place to raise her child. Julian Vance's jaw tightened. He said, she refused it? All these years, I truly thought she had taken it and moved on. My family, they convinced me she was gone because she wanted to be, that she wanted no part of my world. They fabricated the whole story. They manipulated me. They manipulated both of us. His voice was low, laced with a bitter anger. And they never told me about you. Not a word. They let me believe I was childless, that I had chosen that path for my career. Amelia said, my grandmother saw the pain it caused my mother. To be lied about, to be cast aside. She didn't want the same for me. She wanted me safe. So she helped my mother disappear, to a small town far away, where no one knew our story. She saw the anguish on Julian's face, the dawning realization of a lifetime of deception. Julian Vance leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on Amelia. He said, Amelia, I need to know everything. About Evelyn's life after me. About your life. What was it like? What did she do? What did you do? He wanted to fill the void, to understand the missing 25 years. Amelia took a deep breath. She said, my mother was an artist. She painted, mostly landscapes and portraits. She never sold much, but she loved it. We lived simply, in a small house with a big garden. My grandmother taught me to read and write before I even started school. My mother taught me to see the world differently, to find beauty in everyday things, just like you said. A small smile touched her lips. She always told me stories. Stories about a kind, ambitious young man she once loved, who had grand dreams. She never named you, but I always knew who she was talking about. She kept a small, framed photo of you hidden in her jewelry box. The one from the lake. Julian felt a pang in his chest. That same photo was in his hands just last night. He had kept it, too, in a long-forgotten album. He said, she kept my photo? His voice was thick with emotion. Amelia nodded. She said, yes, until she got sick. After I was born, she never fully recovered. Her heart was weak. She tried to hide it, but my grandmother knew. We knew. She spent her last few years painting, reading to me, and making sure I was loved. She died peacefully, in her sleep, when I was 3. Julian Vance closed his eyes, picturing Evelyn, frail but still painting, telling stories to their young daughter, while he was here, building his empire, oblivious to their existence, convinced he was making the right choices. The irony was a cruel twist of fate. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but at what cost? He had missed everything. Her final years, Amelia's childhood, the very essence of their lives. Julian Vance said, "I am so incredibly sorry, Amelia, for all of it, for not being there, for believing the lies, for everything." His apology was raw, heartfelt, stripped of any corporate pretense. He was truly regretful. Amelia said, "I don't blame you, Mr. Vance. My grandmother always said you were a good man caught in a powerful family's web. She said your father was relentless." Julian Vance said, "He was. He still is, in many ways. Even from beyond the grave, his influence shaped my life. But I was an adult. I should have seen through it. I should have fought harder. I should have found her." He gripped his hands together, his knuckles white. "After Evelyn died, what happened then? Your grandmother raised you fully?" Amelia nodded. She said, "Yes. She ran a small bakery in our town. I helped her after school, on weekends. It taught me the value of hard work, of community. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had my mother's memory. Grandma always made sure I remembered her, talked about her, kept her spirit alive," Julian Vance said. "And your education? What did you pursue?" Amelia smiled faintly. She said, "I studied art history in college. Not fine arts, like my mother, but I still loved learning about it. I worked through college, paid my own way. After graduation, I came to the city, hoping to find a job in a gallery, but it's competitive. So, I've been waitressing to save up." Julian Vance's mind immediately began formulating solutions. A job, an apartment, financial security. He could provide all of that, instantly. But he held back. This wasn't about money. It was about connection, about making amends, about building a relationship with a daughter he never knew he had. Julian Vance said, "I want to get to know you, Amelia. Everything. Your dreams, your passions, your struggles. I want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." His voice was earnest, almost vulnerable. Amelia looked out the window, at the vast city, then back at Julian. She had envisioned this moment countless times, but it was always a scene of confrontation, of anger, of demanding answers. Never this quiet, profound exchange. She said, "I want that too, Mr. Vance. More than anything, but I also need you to understand. I'm not here for your wealth. I've made my own way, and I'm proud of that. I needed you to know. I needed to tell you about Evelyn, about me." Julian Vance said, "I understand. Believe me, I truly do. But please, Amelia, call me Julian." He extended his hand, a gesture of tentative bridge building, not a command. Amelia reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, warm. "A father's hand," she said. "Julian." The name felt strange on her tongue, yet deeply right. A new chapter had begun. A connection forged from decades of silence, of secrets, and of profound, undeniable truth. The weight of his sudden fatherhood settled upon him, heavy and unexpected. He knew, with chilling certainty, that his life would never be the same again. This confrontation, so sudden and so unexpected, was only the very beginning of a much larger story. He felt an urge to push her away, to retreat into the safety of his insulated world, but her eyes, Evelyn's eyes, held him captive. He couldn't look away, couldn't deny the truth staring back at him. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for both Julian and Amelia, a delicate dance of discovery and emotional reconstruction. Julian, a man accustomed to making swift, decisive business moves, found himself navigating the uncharted waters of paternal bonding with a tentative grace. He didn't immediately try to shower Amelia with wealth, respecting her assertion that she wasn't after his money. Instead, he sought to understand her world, her passions. He visited the small gallery where she'd hoped to work, quietly using his connections to arrange an interview, not a handout. He drove her past the modest apartment she shared, a stark contrast to his own sprawling estate, and listened intently as she described her daily routines, her dreams, her struggles. Amelia, in turn, found herself slowly peeling back the layers of the formidable billionaire to reveal a man yearning for connection, burdened by decades of solitude and regret. She shared stories of Evelyn, of her grandmother, of the simple, loving life she'd known. She brought him to the small town where she grew up, to the bakery her grandmother still ran, a world away from the gleaming towers of Vance Industries. Julian met her grandmother, a woman whose eyes held a deep wisdom and a hint of gentle forgiveness. He saw the life Evelyn had built, a life free from the constraints of his world, a life that had nurtured his daughter into the strong, independent woman she was. One evening, Julian invited Amelia to his estate for dinner. It was a formal affair, with a private chef and impeccable service, but this time, the grandeur felt less intimidating. As they sat across from each other at the impossibly long dining table, bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, Julian finally spoke of his family. Julian Vance said, "My parents, they're both gone now. My father died 5 years ago, my mother too. They lived their lives convinced they had done what was best for me, for the family legacy. They never admitted their manipulation, not directly. But now, with you here, it's undeniable." His voice was heavy with a mix of sorrow and a quiet fury. "They robbed me of Evelyn. They robbed me of you. They robbed us of a lifetime together." Amelia said, "It's a tragedy, Julian, for all of us. But we have now. And we can build something new. Together." Her words offered a beacon of hope in the shadow of his past. Julian Vance looked at her, truly seeing her. Not just Evelyn's daughter, but Amelia. A kind, resilient, intelligent young woman. He said, "You're right. We have now. And I intend to make the most of it." He paused, then continued, "I've started quietly investigating the details of my parents' involvement. The lawyers, the financial records. It's a painful process, uncovering the extent of their deception, but it's necessary. I need to understand exactly what happened and why. For Evelyn and for you." Amelia said, "Are you sure you want to open those old wounds? It might be easier to just move forward." Julian Vance shook his head. He said, "No, easy isn't always right. They kept us apart, Amelia. They created this void in my life, in Evelyn's and in yours. To simply ignore it would be to let them win. I need to understand, to acknowledge the truth, and to ensure that such manipulation never happens again, not to anyone connected to me." A flicker of his old corporate determination returned, but this time it was tempered with a profound personal resolve. He began making changes, subtle at first, then more profound. He reevaluated his priorities. The endless pursuit of more, the relentless focus on empire building, started to seem less important than the burgeoning relationship with his daughter. He found himself leaving the office earlier, spending weekends not in solitary contemplation of market trends, but talking to Amelia, learning about her day, listening to her perspective on art, on life. He even started visiting the bakery with her grandmother, finding a surprising comfort in its warm, simple atmosphere, a stark contrast to his cold, efficient world. Amelia secured a junior position at a small, respected art gallery, entirely on her own merit, though Julian's subtle connections certainly hadn't hurt. He saw the joy on her face as she talked about her work, her passion, and he realized how much he had missed by prioritizing business over the richness of human experience. One afternoon, Amelia was at Julian's office, going through some of Evelyn's old sketches he had found, when she asked him a question that had been weighing on her. Amelia said, "Julian, what would you have done if you had known about me? Back then, when I was born?" Julian Vance looked out his panoramic window, at the city lights beginning to twinkle. He said, "It's a question I've asked myself 1,000 times these past weeks. A younger me, perhaps, a more selfish, career-driven me, might have been overwhelmed, might have succumbed to my family's pressure. But I like to think that Evelyn's love and the undeniable truth of a child would have made me fight harder, that I would have found a way to be there. I would have wanted to. I deeply regret not having that chance." He turned to her, his eyes warm and sincere. "But I have it now, and I won't waste it." Their relationship blossomed, not as a transaction between a billionaire and a newly found heir, but as a genuine, evolving connection between a father and daughter. Julian learned to laugh again, to share, to show vulnerability. Amelia found a father who, despite his past failings, was genuinely striving to make amends, to be present, to simply be her dad. The shocking twist of her initial confrontation had given way to a profound, human story of rediscovery, regret, and the enduring power of family. Julian Vance, the man who once believed his greatest achievement was his empire, now understood that his greatest treasure was the daughter he almost never knew. He saw his future not just in balance sheets and boardrooms, but in shared laughter, quiet conversations, and the slow, steady rebuilding of a bond lost and miraculously found again. This story of Amelia and Julian reminds us that life's most profound revelations often come from the most unexpected places. It highlights how secrets, even those intended to protect, can cast long shadows, but also how truth, once revealed, has the power to heal and transform. What unexpected family secrets have shaped your life, or the lives of people you know? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more tales of unexpected connections and life-altering truths. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to light.